Regents, I think we should all observe a moment of silence in honor of all those who lost their lives 18 years ago.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Under the comments and questions from the floor section of the agenda, item 3.01, representatives of the PTA. Is there anyone from the PTA who would like to address the board tonight? All right, moving on. Item 3.02, representatives of school employees. Moving on to 3.03, representatives of the Mishawaka Education Foundation. Ms. Mishawaka?
We didn't adopt the agenda.
Aha! I missed something. Yeah, well, just 1 second. All right, we'll skip back to, thank you, Amanda. Skip back to item 1.03, adoption of the agenda. It's recommended that the agenda for the September 11, 2019 regular meeting of the Board of School Trustees be adopted as presented.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carried. All right, now we move on into Ms. Sauer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Curry. I'm here on behalf of the MEF tonight and very excited to talk about all the money that has been raised for our students and our staff over the past school year. As you can see, there's the numbers are on the screen, and I handed out a handout to each one of you at the table. It's incredible what's been done, what the MEF does for the school system, for our staffs and students, and each one of these line items represents lots of hard work, lots of compassion and passion that goes into these projects. So we just wanted to bring it all to your attention. When we put it all together and it's $250,000, it's pretty phenomenal. So, you know, everything from academic competitions to classroom grants and junior achievement, the list goes on and on. So we really want to thank all of our donors who make this possible, and for all of you who come to us with ideas, and the MEF just makes it happen. It's a wonderful board. I'm really proud to be a part of it, just a little bitty part of it. And Jane Wright deserves so much credit. She works so hard and passionately for the school system, and so that's the one thing that we really wanted to talk about tonight. But also, of course, there are a couple other things. There are still raffle tickets to sell, and I have them here tonight. It would be a great night to buy them. They're $50 a piece, and it is for a beautiful travel trailer donated to us by Grand Design. It's valued at over $34,000, and it's a $50 ticket, and we're only selling 1,000 of them. I don't know how many have been sold. Everybody keeps asking that, but we have them out in different areas. I know that this is the stack that I have left right now, so I think they're going pretty fast. We're having people walk in. We're probably selling 6 or 7 every day, and at the football games and all, it's going really well. And Holly Parks was the brain behind this, and it's just really a cool thing.
We're about halfway. So we've been doing it for 3 weeks now. We're about halfway, so we still have 7 weeks to go. We need to sell the rest of these tickets. So soliciting everyone.
Yes, we would love to, I would love to sell some tonight, so see me after the meeting. The Growing the Future dinner and auction is October 17th. That's when we'll draw the winning ticket, and that's when Dr. Spiker and his dream team will be honored. We're looking forward to that. It's going to be a great night, so I hope you all will plan to be there for that evening. And we are still accepting auction items. We've got some really great ones. They are online. The auction has started. You can go on and do the bids, and that's our report from the MEF tonight. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And I have to say that it's remarkable what the MEF has done, is doing, and the growth and what it contributes to the schools. It's very valued. I remember when I was on that board in the very early, the pre-Jane Wright days, we thought we were doing really well if we had $10,000, and this is just phenomenal. So our thanks to the MEF, and our thanks to Ms. Parks for getting the raffle item. Moving on, general public, item 3.04. Is there anyone, no one has signed up to address the board, so we will move on to the consent agenda section of the agenda. On item 4.01, approval of the minutes of the August 14, 2019 regular meeting of the Board of School Trustees. It is recommended that the minutes of the August 14, 2019 regular meeting of the board be approved as presented. Item 4.02, approval of bill warrants and payroll. It's recommended that the bill warrants and payroll in the amount of $5,063,807.30 be approved for payment from the appropriate funds. Item 4.03, approval of financial report. It is recommended that the financial report dated July 2019 be approved as presented. And item 4.04, approval of the consent agenda. It is recommended that the Board of School Trustees approve the consent agenda as presented. Is there a motion to that effect? It's been moved. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. This brings us to the Vision Initiative section of the agenda. Item 5.01, first 90 days plan and survey results. Mr. Barker.
Thank you, President Curry and members of the board. I'm pleased to present to you tonight regarding my first 90 days plan that was created back in July. And as you know, we created a survey and want to talk to you tonight about the information that was gained. Before I start, I do want to just express my appreciation and give a heartfelt thank you to all of the School City of Mishawaka family. Your thoughtfulness and support and prayers for me and my family have been greatly appreciated as we grieve my mother's passing. People here have gone above and beyond for my family, and I appreciate that, as many of you on the board all of you on the board have expressed the same sentiment to me, and I'm just pleased. It's been a hard thing for us to experience, obviously, but the School City of Mishawaka family has come alongside us in just really a short amount of time that I've been here, and I'm just very thankful for that. People, everyone here on the board, members of the admin center, the buildings, people in the community. It's just very appreciated. So thank you for that. As we do talk about this 90-day plan, I want to talk about, just to review, in that plan, we talked about in the first 30 days that I would spend a lot of time listening, and really that hasn't stopped at the end of the first 30 days. I'm still doing that. The middle 30 days, trying to look at the culture and systems that were in place and learn as much as I can about the district, and then the final 30 days to work with you as a board to create my goals for this school year and the vision initiatives that we want going forward. I do want to say the survey that was passed out was not designed to be a school climate and culture audit. It was really designed to look at the challenges that we face, and looking at those challenges, hopefully then to drive change that we need in the school district. So that's where you need to make sure your mindset is as you look at the information that we received. I know a lot of the positives that exist already in this district. That's what brought me here. But part of my work obviously needs to be in working with you, driving the positive change that we need to make this place even better. So we created this anonymous survey and tried to get as much input as we can from many people. Before I start into that, I want to thank Mrs. Jen Smith, our project manager and Vision Initiatives, for Vision Initiatives and Corporate Analytics. She's done a great job of putting together all of the information that was contained in those surveys, and I appreciate her efforts to do that. And while I say that, I also want to give a thank you to Mrs. Jessica Stoltz, who's maybe serving in her last board meeting as my personal administrative assistant, and she's been excellent for me to work with from July 1st on as I started here in that first day, and want to welcome Ann Pettit, who's sitting with her tonight, who's moving into, is transitioning into that role, and look forward to working with her. In regards to the survey was provided at the Leaders Workshop, and at the Leaders Workshop, we had members of the senior leadership team, building leaders, MEA representatives, MEF representatives, Community Accountability Committee members, and members of the Board of School Trustees, who were all given a chance to respond to that survey. I also presented at the City Common Council and gave members of the Common Council the opportunity to also provide input, and then the survey was provided to all School City of Mishawaka employees, both certified and non-certified employees. So the questions were designed, as I said, to drive the work then that I will try to focus on this year. And so there's been 193 responses. So you can see the one-page sheet up on the screen, and I know you as members of the board have actually all the survey results from each individual that chose to respond. But we did create this one-page sheet to kind of highlight all of that work. There were 193 responses. I will say, looking at just the stars section, which in this handout on the screen is the kind of pie chart in the bottom right. That information, not a lot of information was provided to the survey takers to be able to answer that question. It was more of take a look at these 5 things, respond to them, and tell us where you think School City of Mishawaka is in regards to being a startup organization, a turnaround organization, accelerate growth, realignment, or sustaining success. And you can see the information that was gathered there. Very few responses in the startup category. Obviously, we're a school district that's been in place for a long time. And then the rest are divided up between sustaining success through realignment, anywhere from 16 to 30%. That was just really done as a way just to get a quick caption for me as where people thought about the district. But most of the information I want to concentrate on for you tonight, and I think that you'll then want to take with you when we leave here, is regarding the individual responses that were provided by all of the 193 responses. And again, I want to just say a thank you to all of the respondents. I think it takes a lot of initiative to answer open-ended questions and be vulnerable to provide that feedback, and I appreciate that. In looking at the individual responses of all 193, we kind of were able to identify 5 common themes that came to us. And if we can, yeah, thank you. They're on the bottom of the one page, and you also have them in your booklet. But basically, what was identified, number one was, I shouldn't say number one, there were 5. I wouldn't say any of them in any kind of chronological order. I'm not trying to do that, but in the order we just did them for the presentation. Pace or change pace of change and or pace of work was something that was identified. I think that's not necessarily unique to School City of Mishawaka, first of all. Educators feel a heavy pace of change in their work. It's exhausting work to be a great educator. So I wasn't terribly surprised to find that, but we also want to be aware of that as a senior leadership team and as building leaders as to how our employees feel and what we can do to try to minimize that pace of change or that quantity of work that they feel. So that's going to be something based upon that feedback that we're going to use this year to try to make sure we really focus in on the things that matter and provide teachers with the resources they need for the things that matter, and see if there are things that we can even remove from their plates on things that are maybe lesser priority. So that's going to be one of the things that I think as we look at board goals for me as superintendent, that we want to make sure that we focus on. Secondly, is student behavior. There's certainly a feeling that a few students can occupy a lot of time. And I think that's not necessarily unique to School City of Mishawaka either. I think administrators, teachers would all say there are a few students who require a majority of time for dealing with behavior issues. So, but that's something, that came through clear, and it's something that we need to approach, and I know it's something that has already been talked about with the board over the last few months. We've done some work already with our senior leadership team, and as you know, Mr. Welling is also looking to lead some work in that, and that has also started. So I'm confident that we can do some things this school year to address that. And the goal for us on that one specifically is to try to address it as quickly as we can. I don't think we can spend the year just discussing the problem. We need to create an action plan to address the problem and try to address it as quickly as possible. The third item to discuss is the technology implementation. I think the pace of change with technology is also very rapid. And we also changed our student information system right as the school year started. So there are reasons for that, but certainly we want to be receptive to the feedback that we received, and I think there are some things that we can do to communicate and to manage that work that hopefully can help us to improve in that area. The next one is communication. I think if you survey people in schools, certainly communication is something that is difficult. This is an organization with 700 employees, but it's something now that we're aware of. And I think if we could do some things to improve communication, the other things would also take care of themselves as well. I think there's some education that we can put into that communication, and that can help us with the pace of change and work, can help us with behavior. So, I feel really good about the feedback that we received, especially in looking at that from a common themes perspective. And then the final one is just human resources allocation. I wasn't surprised to hear that or receive that in the survey, because it's feedback that I get when I go into the buildings. There's a definite sentiment that people want resources that are closest to where students are, and obviously that's something that we want as well. So we need to look at our allocation of resources in terms of personnel, and that'll be something that we obviously want to evaluate this year. So you haven't had a lot of chance to look at the feedback in terms of the individual responses. I think you'll see some outliers as you read through this large booklet that Mrs. Smith put together, but I think you'll also see the common themes come through. Just for your own information, if you look at the individual responses feedback, you'll see a color-coded chart that represents each of those common themes at the top. Sometimes maybe there's a response that doesn't have anything in the 5 common themes, but I think you'll start to see those common themes come through. So what I'd like to do for tonight anyway is to give you a chance to take this feedback home, review the responses from the 193 people who responded to the survey, and then what we need to do is spend some time working together to create the goals for my work this year on how we can address those 5 common themes and anything else that you might see also in the survey responses. So this time, I really don't have anything to add, but I would certainly take your input and want to also make sure that we allow time at the next meeting to receive that input and drive our goals. So,
Any questions for Mr. Barker?
Was the findings what you thought you would see, or were there a lot of surprises or not surprises, or?
I wasn't terribly surprised after, being here a little while. And I also think, quite honestly, you could give that survey in other school districts and receive very similar data. But I think receiving the data we have one opportunity now to earn the trust of people who provided the data to us. And I think it's really important that they see a response to the survey that they've given us, the information that they've given us, and that they can see that we're now going to create a plan to tackle those issues that they presented to us. And I know that's been my challenge also in working with our senior leadership team. We are somewhat new in our positions, and I think it's important that staff go, that they can see that they provided input to us and that they can learn to trust us that we'll do something with it. And that, I think, is our, the easy part is what we've done so far. The more difficult part will be addressing the issues and finding solutions. But I'm confident that we have the right people in place that we can do that.
Well, it's important. I mean, you don't ever get progress without listening. I mean, it's very easy to do all the talking, but it's a lot harder to do the listening, and then the listening is where you learn. And there's a lot of people, several hundred people, who put a lot of thought into sharing their thoughts, with us. And I think this is going to, I haven't, obviously had an opportunity to read through all of this, but I think it's going to be a very valuable resource for us. And I look forward to hearing where we're going with this.
Thank you.
Anything else? In that case, we'll move on to the reports and discussion items of the agenda. Item 6.01, the July financial report. Mr. Newman?
Thank you, President Curry, members of the board. As usual, I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have. Seeing that we have a lengthy board meeting this evening, I don't want to spend too much time. However, we are reviewing the month of July, and expenditures tend to drop off in the summer months as we're not paying our school year staff. We're not paying our teachers who have elected for contract payoffs at the end of June. So the education fund, it did jump up almost $490,000. Year-to-date fund balance of $4,053,000. So we're still running a deficit in the education fund at the end of July. But that's largely due to the transfers to the operations fund, and we were running an operating surplus in the operations fund due to those transfers. So I think we're up just under $500,000 between the two funds for the year. That's really the only thing I wanted to touch on, with the exception, as I always like to point out, the balance in the self-insurance fund, which did increase yet again in the month of July. We're now up to $277,000 in that fund. And again, happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Are there any questions for Mr. Newman? If not, we'll move on to item 6.02, the 2019 iLearn results. Ms. Stickle and Mr. Laban.
Good evening, President Curry, Mr. Barker, members of the board, guests. Thank you for being here this evening. If you have picked up a newspaper, turned on the news over the last 7 days, I am certain that you have heard conversation regarding iLearn. So tonight we are here to discuss the iLearn assessment and the impact of that statewide assessment in Mishawaka. Mandated in 2017, iLearn is the replacement of the iStep Plus test. It is administered in grades 3 through 8 in both English, language arts, and mathematics, in science in grades 4 and 6, and in grade 5, social studies. Along with that mandate, the state put forth policy that increased the expectations and rigor of that actual assessment itself, and then subsequently that shift resulted in lots of changes to the actual test itself from what we had been giving to our students. Some of those changes are noted on the screen there. A couple of priorities to speak to. The test was computer adaptive this time around. There was the integration of lots of new accessibility features for our struggling students. There was also an alignment to college and career readiness assessments for all of our students as well. Other changes include the on-demand test sessions. One of the bigger ones that was impactful to our staff and students was the fact that the test was completely untimed. That would be a big transition from iStep Plus. And then collectively, the algorithm for which those scores are calculated has shifted from what was iStep Plus to the iLearn assessment. Proficiency rates. Proficiency rates are determined through a process. It's pretty similar across all of the states. It involves, in this case, Indiana educators with content area expertise and years of collective experience that come together. They review the expectations of what's being assessed. They use an objective criteria to judge those scores on, and then collectively they determine cut scores at each of the individual student grade levels. We see those scores reflected on the screen. On the left-hand column, School City's performance against the furthest right, which is the proficiency levels in grades 3 through 8 in the state of Indiana. It's important to talk about the comparison of performance from historical tests to what is right now. As educators, that's our desire. We always want to understand, how are we doing? How did we do compared to last year? In this case, it's really hard to compare what was iStep Plus to iLearn for some of the reasons that we've already discussed. The design of the test, the types of questions that the students were asked to demonstrate proficiency were dramatically different. They were more complex, of a much higher rigor and expectation when it came to actual test administration. Simply for those reasons, in and of itself, it's almost impossible to say, I want to look at what was iStep Plus from 2018 and what is now iLearn in 2019 to say there was an increase or a decrease in how our students are learning. One thing to mention here as well, I apologize, is the conversation about the impact on school accountability. We've been encouraged by the conversation, and the State Board of Education has actually come forth and decided that we are not going to be held harmless, meaning School City of Mishawaka schools will retain their letter grades from the 2017-18 school year and will not be issued a new one because of the results and the impact that it has on Indiana classrooms and schools and communities, and the recognition that these scores are not reflective of the learning that's happening every single day in our schools. So because of that, because of the realities that we're seeing in these numbers that were, as the state stated, were lower than what was anticipated or expected, right? They went back to the drawing board and said, because of that, we have to acknowledge that these can't negatively impact our staff or the staff of Indiana, the students of Indiana, the perception of the communities of the areas in Indiana. And as the result of that, we are not going to issue new letter grades, state letter grades, to Indiana schools for the 18-19 school year based on these test scores.
It's also important to note, though, that as you saw, we were underperforming compared to the state average. This is not a new trend for us. This is a trend that we've been examining for over 2 years and using to drive the work in School City of Mishawaka, getting a better understanding behind that trend so that we can then change the trajectory of learning for our students. However, having said that, there's 2 graphics up there that we would like to highlight. What these graphics are able to show is supported through countless studies that reveal that the use of achievement measures alone, meaning student performance, when evaluating school performance, biases the evaluation against schools who serve vulnerable populations. What is indicated on both of these graphics with the arrow are students that qualify for free and reduced lunch, which you can see to the far right then. The populations in the boxes are those students who are considered paid lunch students and historically outperform their free and reduced peers. Another way to look at that graphic, or another way to understand this trend, is if you look at the difference between performance or achievement as compared to student growth. So this scatter plot is showing you that as a student's income increases, so does their student achievement. However, if you look at the relationship between academic growth, meaning the change in achievement over time rather than just flat achievement, a student's socioeconomic status is considerably weaker in its link to student performance. Academic growth is more likely to be more closely related to what is happening in our schools, what is happening with our students, our educators, other adults within the organization, and all the things that happen in schools to create learning, rather than the demographics of the community and the student population it serves. And now that we better understand that relationship between poverty and student performance, it is clear that student growth is a considerably more accurate depiction of school effectiveness rather than school achievement. Understanding this helps us to focus on what we can control and to better celebrate the successes we are seeing in our buildings.
Speaking to some of those successes, we have a couple of different graphics, some of which I'm going to speak directly to, others in which I'm just going to talk through. The first being on that slide up there. We see Twin Branch and Hums Elementary outperform state averages in several grade levels across both English language arts and in mathematics, while Liberty Elementary School returned higher student proficiency rates in grade 6 in English language arts. As displayed on the screen, the biggest graphic there, Battelle Elementary has much to celebrate, specifically in grade 4 in their performance in mathematics, as does Beeger Elementary School, also in mathematics, in grades 5 and 6 for performing near or above state averages. If we look at the bottom graphic and we look more towards our upper grade levels, we are so incredibly proud of the hard work that's being done at Mishawaka High School with our exceptional learners. Again, as demonstrated down in that bottom graphic there, we see an outperformance against state averages at Mishawaka High School of 13%.
We are excited to continue celebrating the work and the effort of our staff and our students. We also recognize that there's still work yet to be done. So oftentimes people ask us what comes next. What do we do with these results? Our response is a continuation of our commitment to the work of Learning by Design. Learning by Design represents the systematic planning that articulates the increased expectations as well as the support that will be applied to our core mission of continuously improving schools to benefit student learning here at School City Mishawaka. We look forward to sharing updates in the future on Learning by Design and the good work that occurs daily in Mishawaka schools with our staff and students. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Are you saying that the scores in the schools did not parallel free and reduced lunches?
Now, what we're trying to demonstrate with those graphics is that there is a significant corollary between a student's socioeconomic status and student achievement. And so if...
And I may be wrong, I have these figures way off, but I had heard somewhere that only, out of 13,000 schools, only 43 schools scored above 50% on both the math and English.
Yeah, it was a chalk beat report that suggested, I don't remember what the bigger number was, 17,000, thank you. 17,000 schools, only 45 schools saw an increase in overall proficiency in math and English language arts. And in one of the broadcasts that, that was done, when we see results like that, right, it's certainly indicative of a much larger problem at hand as opposed to scrutinizing the single performance of one corporation in a district. There are much larger things and bigger conversations that certainly need to be had when you see those types of results statewide.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah.
So are the school grades staying the same from last year, or are they going to base the grades on something else?
They'll be frozen with
Okay.
last year's results.
For state letter grades.
And then next year, they'll issue new grades based on a comparison of the I-Learn next year against the I-Learn this year, correct?
They're still yet to analyze how they're going to be
Okay.
able to show that validity, because it's still certainly been under question based on the unusual results that we got year one.
The mandate has basically stated the same. They need to go back to the drawing board and reassess the system that is in place for holding schools accountable, and only until that is done will they reconsider issuing letter grades.
But it appears to be based on an achievement model rather than a growth model. I mean, down in Indianapolis, is that
current
correct?
Yeah, they haven't shown a turning away from that model.
So I received 3 of them in the mail today, the results for 3 of my students. And when they looked at the results, so I had 2 8th graders and then a 5th grader last year, or when they took the test. And the eighth grader, one of the eighth grader who is in the early college programs and is the stellar student academically, did horrible on the iLearn. And then the one who struggles in school daily seemed to pull it through for the iLearn, which didn't make any sense because she's never passed the I-step. So it was very confusing to me. And then my sixth grader now, then she seemed to do wonderfully. So none of the results made sense whatsoever on how it came through. So I can imagine that the state is confused as well, because as a parent and as the students of the test taking, we're super confused today. So interesting information.
Was
And
it,
as it stands now, it'll always only be a snapshot of one moment in time.
Exactly.
And so to base all of the work that happens in our buildings day in and day out on that one snapshot, even if it's a valid instrument up to measure achievement, is never going to drive the improvements that we make. It can't. It's
Good.
one moment.
Or the hard work of our staff.
was that expected? Like, when iLearn was implemented, clearly at the state level, it wasn't expected that the results would be so low, but educators in general, like, were you expecting there to be some weirdness this year because it's a first year, or because that the test is so different? Or are you just as shocked?
We anticipated it'd be difficult to measure growth.
Sure.
Certainly, without having, a previous year to measure against. I also think we anticipated the issues with the rigor and matching the rigor. One thing that you guys are aware of is that we implemented a different formative assessment tool last year. We went with Airways intentionally to try and get a better predictor to our iLearn results, and we saw that evidence throughout. So I can't say that we were shocked at those results in terms of where they landed relative to the state. It's never what we want to see, but we have other instruments and measures in place that we were monitoring all along that are truly driving instruction, they're driving curricular decisions, they're driving the day in and day out learning,
Right.
that were much better predictors than that one.
If I had to answer that question, I would say I'd be shocked if we didn't see it. What I see is every year, constant chaos surrounding standardized testing. Certainly, we want to do well, and we want to still yet use the data that we receive to compare ourselves with other school districts. But to think that 1 out of 2 students were labeled a failure in the state of Indiana this year, when the majority of these students are going to go on and build very successful lives and do great things, yet we sent home letters at our expense yesterday to all these parents, and the majority of them received negative news. I find that terribly sad. I think it's important that the governor did come out and the superintendent of the DOE and immediately call for a pause. And I agree with asking for that, a pause in accountability. And the State Board of Education last week then supported their recommendation and delayed the accountability results. So now we will need our state legislators to actually enact law to create this hold harmless agreement. But quite honestly, we've changed the system so many times over the last 10 years that it's impossible to make comparisons from one year to the next. The hope is that we'll get there with this iLearn test, that we'll have something that we can use that does create comparison each year. The problem that we usually have with that is, even when that happens, they change the cut score for what is passing from year to year, because that then goes up. So as those, let's say we take the exact same test this year, what typically happens is the cut score for passing increases, and then we make comparisons for performance and growth that are no longer fair because the cut score has increased. So there are a lot of factors in this, and I totally agree with Mr. Laban and Mrs. Hickle for what they've said, because we can't allow this one test snapshot to drive everything that we do. We have to use it, and we will, and we already are doing that. But there are many things that we need to do in educating the whole child here for our students, not only in School City of Mishawaka, but across the state of Indiana, because there are many students who aren't motivated by math or English language arts, who have other interests that we're meeting in our schools every day. And I'm proud of that. I've spoken with students. I spoke with a student at the high school who talked to me about her interest in fine arts and how she's able to meet those needs by the course offerings that we have here. And she doesn't care if she ever takes a standardized test again. And unfortunately, she will. And we'll continue to try to create in the whole child movement that we have here, programs and offerings that can appeal to all kinds of interests for students. And that's the work that's important, and that's the work that happens here every day, and our students should be celebrated for that, and not told the things that we told them, and our teachers should be celebrated for that. And to evaluate teachers solely based upon how students do on one test, I think is not fair either, and we don't do that here. It is a part of it, as it has to be by state law, but it's certainly not everything that we use to evaluate anything about our schools.
And since it seems obvious that the feedback that we're going to get from the state is going to be of limited utility, because not only because of all the changes that they do in the testing and how they do it, but in the fact, in terms of the students, I mean, think about Mrs. Park's children, that you get tested at the end of the year, and then at the beginning of the year, next year, you find out what you didn't learn last year. That doesn't seem a very useful thing in driving student growth. And am I correct in my understanding that in our focus on a more of a growth model, that we're going to be using some leading edge indicators with, as students, enter a grade, we're going to be assessing, where they are at that point, and then continually reassessing to be able to fill in deficits and support them, so at the end of the year, we'll actually be able to see how well they've done at the end of the year, so they get some positive reinforcement instead of to counter what's coming from the state. Is that correct?
That's definitely correct.
Yeah, we certainly have deployed a multifaceted assessment strategy, K-12. So we'll start the year with a diagnostic assessment to gather an understanding of where our students are in that moment in time. And then we'll incrementally give benchmark assessments to progress monitor and show incremental amounts of growth. And then we'll give an interim mid-year to reassess how our students are performing. And then we come to the end of the year with a summative assessment.
Well, and I think that'd be something that'd be very helpful and more useful for the community to know those kind of scores, because that would show the actual, progress being made in the schools.
It's also caused us to really be intentional with helping our students to better understand assessments. I think our students today, and teachers can speak to this, have a better understanding of assessment than ever before, because we've had to be intentional of helping our students to understand that while we want you to do your best, that this is just a measurement of where you're at this one moment in time, so that when they see that letter, they don't hold their whole identity attached to the successes and failures that letter is pointing out. That's caused us to be a lot more intentional with the language that we have with our students leading up to assessments, while taking assessments, in understanding their assessment results as we're continually moving throughout the year.
Just as the same as we have been intentional with our language with our staff and our community members to represent that. We're not going to hold our hat on a single letter grade that's issued from an arbitrary system that doesn't reflect the good work that they do and put in every single day inside of the classrooms.
And the results that we get in showing growth, you're measuring growth during the year, is this shared with the parents the way that these kind of assessments are shared, so that they know at the beginning of the year, your child is here, at the end of the year, they're here, this is the progress that they've made? Is that something that we're sharing with families?
Yeah, it's certainly about having a conversation. That's the most important part, is that there's a mutual understanding of where our students are performing, how parents understand how they can support the learning of their student, both in the classroom and out of the classroom as well. So it's encouraging, one, making sure that the data is accessible to our staff first, understanding what the data is telling us, right, and then being able to then take that information, have a conversation with the parent, whether that be through a parent-teacher conference or the sending home of a report, but giving some context behind what those numbers are representing and what they're not representing as well. What is the data telling us? What is the data not telling us? So It's more about having those conversations to make sure that staff understand those things that you pointed out.
All right, thank you. Anything else? All right, thank you very
I
much.
guess
Thank
my question is, where do we go from here? What do you,
Here at School City or the state or,
us, what,
what we'll continue to do probably is react to legislative changes. Right now, the State Board of Education is considering changing the accountability model for next school year. So they're taking input and feedback right now on that. You may read about how they wanted to change the accountability grade for a high school, let's say, based upon how students do post-high school, either in secondary work or employment or being enlisted. So that's the issue as it continues to change, so we're reacting to it and then also trying to be proactive and help those changes maybe not happen that maybe would be negative.
I think in the past, you've been fairly active in Indianapolis. Is this something where, I mean, they're soliciting your response?
I wouldn't say that they
Or you're-
ask for our input.
You're
We try
giving
to,
them.
we try to provide our input.
Good.
That probably sounded sarcastic, which I can be, but the State Superintendent's Association, the State Principals Association, we are all actively engaged in that discussion. And I personally feel indebted to do that. It's different now for me being here because the things that I've argued somewhat where I've been relate more here. You know, I think if the state wants to look at what we're producing with kids once they leave us, then we should also be looking at what happens to children before they come to us. And how does that factor into accountability? You know, there's a direct correlation between poverty and achievement. What we could mostly tell from these iLearn results this year is a direct reflection of poverty throughout the state.
Yep.
So it's not surprising that places like Carmel perform well. They also have very low poverty. So now, having said that, we don't want to accept that as an excuse here. We want to provide under-resourced students with the things that they need to be successful. And that's what we'll continue to do. But I'm also going to be as engaged as I can be so that we don't send a message to students and parents and schools and teachers and communities that some place is an A based upon one standardized test score.
I guess the message that I'd like to see go out to the community is that what the parents received is sad, but at the same time, we are proactively interacting with the decision makers in Indianapolis to enact some change that could be positive moving forward.
Right.
Okay.
What we need is to be able to communicate that, just as you said, so that people in legislative positions are influenced by votes. And then we could have a groundswell of people who actually vote in
Right.
legislators so that they're influenced by that.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, if there's nothing else on this subject, we'll move on to item 7.01, the personnel report. Mr. Calderon?
Yeah, President Curry, Mr. Barker, school board members, it is recommended that the personnel report dated September 11th, 2019 be approved as presented.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to accept the personnel report as presented. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Now moving into the large part of the agenda tonight, business and operations. Item 9.01, recommendation to approve independent consulting agreement with Spiker Fields and Associates. Mr. Barker.
We have many items under this section, and since we spent a great deal of time discussing this item at the last board meeting, what I'm going to do is just point out the changes. We tabled this based upon needing to add a begin and end date to the agreement for Dr. Spiker as a consulting agreement. That has been added under the description of services in the agreement, so it states that it begins August 1, 2019 and continues until termination on July 31 of 2020. Should also be noted, the 60-day notice to cease the agreement is also there as well. So I think that meets all of the discussion that we had at the last meeting. So based upon that, I would recommend approval.
I'd like to move for approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the independent consulting agreement as presented. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item 9.02, 2020 budget review. Mr. Newman.
Oh, he's standing.
Oh, man.
Take your heels in.
Thank you, President Curry, Mr. Barker, and members of the board. We are going to go through the 2020 budget this evening. As you guys know, this is the first year that our exemption from property tax caps goes away. So if we were looking for good news here, you're not going to get it on this agenda item. Just to review the 2020 budget funds, of course, we have a debt service fund. The exempt debt service fund is now gone. That debt that was listed under that fund is now in the non-exempt debt service fund. We have the referendum capital debt service fund. That was the referendum bonds that were sold. That is exempt. We also have the referendum operating fund, also exempt. The education fund, which of course is replaced the general fund, and it entails all the educational related expenditures that used to be part of that general fund. And finally, we have the operating fund, which includes the non-educational components of what were the general fund. It also includes what was the capital projects fund, the transportation fund, bus replacement fund, and historical society fund. We will now be beyond 2 years from those funds, so this is the last time I'm going to talk about those old funds. So, first off, this is our debt service fund. Listed in that little table there are all the various issuances of debt that the school corporation has issued over the years. Again, there's a number of issuances in there that were exempt until 2020. They are now in this fund. I'll point out that we have anticipated debt service listed there of $875,000. That includes a common school fund loan that the board approved last fall that we haven't finished spending, but we will within the next month and a half, and we will then be able to build it in to the 2020 debt service fund. It also includes, that number includes $800,000, which would be for first mortgage bonds, Series 2019, which hopefully are approved later this board meeting. But again, since that isn't sold, we don't have schedules, it's anticipated at this time. The unreimbursed textbook amount for 2020 is $163,252. Again, that is our free and reduced students who do not pay for their textbooks. We submit a claim to the state. We are reimbursed a dollar amount by the state. However, it is not enough to fully reimburse the school corporation for what we're out by not being able to collect those fees. So that dollar amount, along with any free and reduced kids who come after that count date, get added in here, and we're allowed to recoup that dollar amount through our debt service fund. And then finally, interest on temporary loans. Again, we did not do them in 2019. We will do them in 2020, tax anticipation warrants. And so that line item pays for the interest to take those out. The interest is paid back through the debt service fund. So again, all debt here now is within the caps. All debt that was previously exempt is now part of this fund. And the 2020 budget estimate is $5,383,958. That anticipated debt service number is probably high, so that will come down when the Department of Local Government Finance works our budget later in December. Next fund is the referendum capital debt service. Again, this was approved by the voters via referendum in 2016. It is outside the caps forever, or for the life of the repayment period through 2032. And again, this paid for the $13 million of construction projects that we did over the past couple years. The referendum operating fund, again, this was approved via referendum in 2016. It's rate capped at .2434, and it pays for our Director of Technology, our Assistant Director of Technology, our Technology Integration Specialist. We have 5 district-wide technology specialists, 2 technology assistants at Mishawaka High School, and 1 tech assistant in each elementary school and John Young Middle School. It also includes hardware, software expenditures of about $425,000 and the annual transfer to rainy day of $400,000. I did break down the expenditures over there to the right between salaries, benefits, hardware, software, and then that transfer. The 2020 budget estimate for this fund is just under $1.9 million, subject to our assessed valuation and the actual levy, which again will come when the Department of Local Government Finance reviews our budget in December. So it's possible that I might have to take that amount down slightly. The education fund, again, it's the education expenditures that were formerly part of that general fund. Staffing, it's the salaries and benefits of our teachers, our teaching aides and assistants, our special education teachers and program assistants, our psychologists, speech language pathologists, counselors, media and library teachers and aides, building principals and their staff. Here in this office, it includes the instruction and curriculum department. We're also allowed to build what we pay our athletic coaches into the education fund. It also includes, well, let me back up for a second. I like to say that when it comes to salaries and benefits, if you work in a school building and you're not the custodian and you're not the food service person, you're coming out of the education fund. If you work in the central office and you don't work in the curriculum and instruction department, you're coming out of the operations fund. That's kind of the quick way to divide the two funds there. The education fund also includes instructional supplies and equipment, library books, supplies, building office supplies, our transfer tuition, whether that's really to ourselves with Oaklawn or to the Elkhart Area Career Center or Vogue or wherever it might be, that's paid out of the education fund. Our nurses, our athletic trainers are paid from this fund. Teacher or instructional professional development comes from this fund. And again, any technology, hardware, software that we did pay for, that we didn't pay for through our operating referendum or through a common school fund loan that was instructional related, it would come from the education fund. So the education fund revenue, our current ADM in the system today was 5,184. I rounded that off. I like 5s and 0s. So 5,185. They did change the state. The legislature did change the law for how they are going to compute our tuition support moving forward. We've gone back to 2 counts now. For the past 2 years, there was always 2 counts, but only the fall count counted towards our funding. So now they've gone back to using that spring count for funding, which is not good for the vast majority of schools, as we see a decrease in our enrollment when we get to that fall count. So I estimated 5,185 for the fall and 5,150 for the spring. I looked at the past 6 or 7 years to see where that number went to kind of come up with where I thought that would go. We did make a change. We are going to keep open enrollment open this year, so hopefully we don't see as steep of a decline, because as some kids leave, we should be able to pick some up between now and the spring count. But based on those numbers, that's going to generate, I'm using the worksheet, and I'm using the DOE's worksheet for fiscal year 20. So based on those numbers, basic tuition support of $33,665,000. My special education numbers are coming just shy of 3.3 million. Honors diploma grant, 73,000. My career in tech, I'm estimating at about 800,000. And then I threw an additional line in there because since this is the first year of the biennium, I do know what our increase is going to be in that second year, which is 2.1%. So the dollar amount that we receive from the state for each and every kid when we get into, it's really not till November of 2020, but it's retroactive to July, is going to increase by 2.1%. So that's what that $425,000 is. Yes, sir.
Can we get some sort of a read in the spring, would be appropriate, on how opening enrollment has helped negate this 2 count, so we know how that's coming?
Yeah, well, obviously, we'll know what the count is,
Yeah.
and then we can compare it to previous years. So if we see
Good.
that we've remained flat, we'll know that, hey, we're offsetting roughly 50 to 100 kids that we may have otherwise lost looking at previous years. So we should absolutely be able
Good.
to provide some information there. I did want to point out that there used to be a category on here that you saw, and we saw it on our DOE 54, that's now gone, and it's the complexity index, or the complexity calculation. It's the additional amount of money that certain schools get per student. For example, South Bend gets more money per student than we get. We get more money per student than Penn gets. That's based on our free and reduced well, it's not directly based on our free and reduced population anymore. It's based on a direct certification. But it used to be broken out into its own category, and I take it that the state wanted to kind of hide it a little bit because they've gotten rid of that category, and now they just lump it all into your basic tuition support. So if you were wondering that, that category has gone away, although I can do a backwards calculation and tell you what our additional complexity dollars are. But they don't list it on anything anymore. It's kind of hidden in the background. In addition to the tuition support, miscellaneous revenue, we're going to see indirect costs from our federal grants. That's where we can bill our federal grants for the time that the business or the HR or the other departments put into executing those grants. We'll see at least $15,000 from those. I estimate interest earnings at around $210,000. Student and other fees, that would include preschool, of about $150,000. Summer school reimbursement of about $160,000. And then miscellaneous revenue, I estimated that at about $35,000. So total education fund revenue for calendar year 2020, $38,820,000 estimated. Getting into the expenditures, for both the education and the operations fund, I did project a salary increase for employees. I did project a increase for health insurance and other benefits. Because we're now using consistent funds, I can do a comparison here, 2019 to 2020. So in the education fund, our salaries look like they're going to jump. That's the biggest category, as you would expect, by about $905,000. Benefits, not as large of a jump as you might think. So I have a 4% increase to health insurance projected within the budget. But you only see a $78,000 increase, and that's due to the change that the state made with teachers' retirement. They reduced it by 2%. So we're saving 2% for every dollar paid to a teacher who's a post-96 retiree. So we're saving money, spending more on health insurance, we're saving on turf, and it nets out to about $78,000 increase for 2020. Professional technical services, I just had that budgeted a little high last year. I brought that back down, so we're saving some money in that category. Other purchase services, supplies, capital outlay. Capital outlay, the decrease there is actually due to a change in how the State Board of Accounts is having us charge certain things. They changed a lot of our object codes around on us late last fall. So some of the difference that you're seeing is just a change in the object codes they're having us use. But all told, I'm estimating about $857,000 increase to the education fund budget for 2020 as compared to 2019. This next slide, same fund, it's just a different way to look at the numbers now if we looked at them by program. So if we looked at our regular programs, that's regular instruction, again, an increase of about $354,000. Special programs shows a decrease. No, we don't have any decrease in services. I was just budgeted a little high last year. Special programs is a fun one to budget because the majority or a good portion of the special education is paid for through grants. So it's kind of trying to find that balance of what am I going to be able to pay through these grants versus what's going to be remaining in the education fund. As I have a little bit more information this year, I was able to decrease that program in the education fund because it's picked up within those grant funds. Summer school, there's a large increase in the summer school. We had a wonderful summer school program here last summer, but it was more expensive and did cost more than what I had projected for 2019. So for 2020, I've increased that. Remediation, again, you see a decrease there. Remediation in summer schools, it's a fine line. It could be the exact same thing that you're doing. If you do it during the school year, it's remediation. If you wait until after the school year's over, it's summer school. So, you know, there's a little bit of a difference there. Transfer tuition, again, those are our payments into our Oak Lawn program, over to the Elkhart Career Center, maybe to Vogue, maybe to the Rise Academy. It's where we have our students attending other educational institutions of some sort where we pay them. So total transfer tuition basically flatlined, just a minor increase of about $5,000. Support services, pupils, that's your counselors, that's your psychologists, that's your staff that certainly work with students and pupils, but they're not instructional in nature. They're providing support services. And again, just a minor decrease there, I think, due to turnover. And then support services instruction, that's your Sarahs and your Corys and your Katies. And again,
That's not all that.
and so again, that's an increase there of about $123,000. Although I don't believe it's going to be that high. I think Title IV is going to kick in and reduce that expenditure down a little bit. And then finally, school administration, that's your principals and their secretaries, your athletic director, athletic department, et cetera. Again, an increase in that category. And then a slight increase to the athletic. Really, it's community services, but that's mostly athletic-related stipends that we pay our teachers and other staff. So again, it's just another way of looking at those same numbers, projecting an increase of about $857,000. So if we summarize the education fund, we've got revenue of about $38 million, or just under $39 million, expenditures just under $32 million. So if we looked at just that, we would run a balance of just under $6.9 million. However, we need to transfer money to the operating fund. I think we can stick to that $8 million figure. I think again, I was probably $500,000 to $750,000 high in transferring that $3 million in 2019. So we'll end up with a higher balance in the operations fund, and that's what's going to allow us to stick with the $8 million transfer going into 2020. You'll see more when I get into the operations fund. So again, and I said this last year and I can't say it enough, I'm very conservative with how I estimate my revenues and how I estimate my expenditures. So really we're looking at a worst case scenario in that education fund of bringing that cash balance, that operations balance down by about $1.1 million, which is similar to what we thought last year. Moving forward to the operations fund, again, it replaces all those funds plus the non-educational expenditures that were previously part of the general fund. Already kind of talked about the staff that's included in there. Again, non-educational supplies and equipment, custodial supplies, all of our bus drivers, our buses, our fuel, our supplies, our repair and maintenance on those buses. Our utilities is a huge expenditure in this fund. Professional development for non-instructional staff would come from this fund. And then non-educational technology. So if Eric had to buy me a computer, it wouldn't come from the education fund, it would come from the operations fund. And then our property casualty insurance is in here as well. I didn't put it in the slide, but we also pay about $780,000 of debt service for the old energy savings and QZAB bonds from our operations fund currently, which is unfortunate. Operations fund revenue, our local property tax, again, we're now at a max levy. The operations fund is a levy-driven fund now. The Department of Local Government Finance, they determine what that maximum levy is. This year it is last year's max levy, which was $3,218,007, multiplied by the assessed growth quotient, which was 3.5%. So the max levy for 2020 is $3,330,000. I'm estimating other taxes at $232,000. I will point out we do not get local income tax dollars. We got receipts from extracurricular funds. That's pretty much the money we collect for transportation for athletics and other things that comes into this fund, at about $225,000, and then miscellaneous revenue just based on previous years of about $75,000. So the total operations revenue, ignoring the transfers from education, is about $3.66 million. In looking at the expenditures, salaries, again, comparing 2019 to 2020, salaries, a fairly slight increase within the salaries there. Again, a decrease in the benefits. That is due to workers' comp. I had overestimated the portion of workers' comp in 2019 that would come out of the operations fund. So our workers' comp or insurance is broken down by employee. So when we get that bill, I look at our employees, where they're being paid from, and then that's how that's charged. I had something off. So that negative is largely due to the workers' comp. There is similar increase to health insurance and other benefits as there was in the education fund. Going down the list, again, it's getting into a little bit of some changes in the object codes, explains why that capital outlay went down so much and the property services and supplies kind of went up. It's just due to changes in the object codes from one year to the other. But all told, the budget I'm estimating will be $162,000 higher than last year. Again, part of this goes back to later in this board meeting when we asked the board to approve permission to sell the bonds in 2019. Assuming that is approved, I was able to go into certain line items and decrease certain construction or certain repair line items in the operations fund to bring that balance down. If we don't sell those bonds, I probably have to come back for an additional appropriation at some point in 2020 to get those expenses back in the operations fund. Again, just another way, I won't go through every single line, to look at the dollar amounts by program. That first line being support services, that's the superintendent's office, the communications office, business office, HR, and operations office, and so on down the line. I did want to point out land acquisition and development. We put $250,000 in there last year. I put $0 in there in the operations fund this year. Again, looking at those bonds, if there was something that we wanted to do, we have some other monies that we could look to do that, because I'm trying to keep my expenditures in the operations fund down, so I'm not transferring $9 million from the education fund into the operations fund. There's a couple line items in here that hopefully we don't have to spend, but I put them in there because you're supposed to. Emergency allocation, $100,000, and then I did, again, it's due to an object code or a programmatic change, but I do have some construction money in here just in case. Again, if we don't need it, it won't get spent. So to summarize the operations fund, revenue of $3.6 million. Those expenditures came to $10.5 million, which means without any transfers from the education fund, we would be running a $6.8 million deficit. The $8 million transfer comes from the education fund, and it would show, based on these numbers, that we would run an operating balance of $1.1 million. However, we will not run an operating balance of $1.1 million due to the circuit breaker losses. I don't have a great handle on, or a great confidence in what that circuit breaker loss is going to be next year. The estimate from the Department of Local Government Finance is $846,000. If that were the actual circuit breaker losses, that would be phenomenal. However, there's two components to that. The DLGF did not have knowledge of the 2019 anticipated debt service that potentially will be approved this evening. And so it's not factored into their numbers. Had it been, their number would be higher. However, it wouldn't be as high as the estimates we've gotten through policy analytics via Baker Tilly, which could range anywhere from 1.9 to over $2 million. For the purposes of budgeting, I used $1.5 million, and if you go through all the budget forms that were provided, you'll see it in there a couple different places. We should know early, within the first few months of 2020, what that circuit breaker loss will be, and of course we will have to adjust accordingly then moving forward. So Again, there's just, with only St. Joe and Lake counties reverting that exempt debt, there's just not a great exact number that anybody can point to say that's what you're going to lose. It's an estimate, and it's certainly a bit frustrating trying to plan not knowing what that number is going to be. But again, we will not run a $1.1 million operating balance in this fund because it's going to be at least $1 million, and it could be as much as $2.2 million that we're going to lose to the circuit breaker next year. This is the Form 3 Notice to Taxpayers. This is what we'll be asking for board approval to, board permission to advertise on, in the next agenda item. I did want to point a couple things out. That first red circle there is, again, that's the DLGF's estimate for our circuit breaker tax losses. So I put a special note in there because I wanted to point out the fact that we're estimating higher than that number. So that's what that special note is. Again, the total levy that we're estimating based on this form is $11.9 million compared to last year, which was 10.8. However, I wanted to point out the difference between an advertised budget and an actual budget. In 2019, when we went through the 2019 budget, that Form 3, that totaled $11.9 million. When they actually came back and worked our budget, it drops down to the 10.8. So this evening on that Form 3, the 2020 advertised, again, it's that 11.9, but closer to what I expect it to be will be about 11.1, 11.2. So it's about, I didn't write it down on my notes, it's about $300,000 to $400,000 higher levy than last year. I think we'll be right in that range. And there's a number of reasons why your advertised budget is always high. Some of it has to do with gateway, some of it just has to do with protecting yourself. If your AV were to shoot way up, you don't want to be caught not able to collect all the taxes that you might be able to collect because you estimated certain things low. So again, we're looking at a fairly negligible increase in the levy for 2020 when compared to 2019. Capital projects plan, again, on the next agenda item, we'll be asking for permission to advertise this. It's a number of different pages, so I just kind of chopped it up so I could get it on one slide. We are supposed to include any capital asset that we might purchase over $10,000 over the next 3 years. It's a very difficult thing to project. But I did similar to last year, I included something in there for technology, hardware and equipment, custodial and maintenance equipment, just in case we did have to make a purchase like that. We're covered. It's already in our plan. We don't have to amend our plan. And same thing with the projects at the bottom. Again, if we had to do an HVAC or a roof or some sort of mechanical type of a project, at least it's already in our capital projects plan. We don't have to come back and amend it to do those things. I don't expect to do those things next year, but again, I wanted them in there just in case. And finally, the bus replacement plan. That very last line there, line 14, that's the bus that the board had approved us to purchase earlier this year. We don't have it, but I've reflected it like we do have it because we will have it in 2019. But next year we're just planning to replace that 2007 84 passenger, and those are running about $125,000. And then again, 2 buses would be due for replacement the following year, and then 1 each subsequent year. So again, the bus replacement plan for next year would be to purchase 1 84 passenger bus, at least at this time, and that would cost us about $125,000. So again, the next item on the agenda, we'll ask for permission to
Alex, what's the
advertise.
useful life?
Well, the recommended useful life from the state is 12 years.
Okay.
So if we replace a bus before it reaches its 12th year, there's a special part of this plan that we have to complete. However, we're not proposing doing that. And actually, last year we proposed replacing that 84 passenger in 2019, and we didn't. I was just working with Ken and saying, okay, no, I think we can go 1 more year, and if we can go another year, it makes sense to go another year. So it's really when you start spending, when you start throwing bad money at a bus to repair it or to do this or that, that's when we really need to make sure that we replace that bus. I am very, very confident we will be replacing that bus next year.
Okay.
Very old. So again, that is my budget presentation for this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Can you Go back to page 1 and scroll through them all slowly.
I was really about to smack you.
Well, thank you for a very thorough presentation. It's appreciated.
You'd almost have to join the circus at this point, the plates that you're spinning. So I hope that they all land and they don't break.
Don't sit down, Alex, you're the next. 9.03, permission to advertise bus replacement, CPF plans, and notice of public hearing. Mr. Newman?
Thank you, President Curry, members of the board. So again, I believe the documents are part of that agenda item, but per the Indiana statute, we need your permission to advertise those. The Budget Form 3 actually is simply advertised through the Gateway program, so with your approval tonight, I'll go click a button, and it will be advertised on the Indiana Gateway website, and anybody who has signed up for notifications for School City of Mishawaka will get an email that that's now been published. And then we will also publish the Form 3, the bus replacement plan, and the capital projects plan on our website tomorrow morning with your approval. And in addition to that, the bus replacement plan and capital projects plan are published once in the South Bend Tribune, again with your approval this evening.
Move for approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the advertisements as presented. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Now to 9.04, review of proposed financing. Mr. Newman and Baker Tilly.
Thank you, President Curry. I'm going to introduce the item, and then Pooja's going to come up and kind of go over the actual finance plan. But as the board is well aware, I believe it was about 10 or 11 months ago that Dr. Spiker, Mike Faulkner, and I started down the journey of the Mishawaka High School Traffic Safety Plan. And that is the main reason for the sale of these bonds. That traffic safety plan was presented to the board. We held a neighborhood meeting, and the board gave our blessing to move forward with Marsh to finalize the drawings on that plan. And it is still our goal to break ground on that plan shortly after, the day after school is out this year. In addition to, well, I would just like to briefly go through the projects that would make up this, this proposed $5 million lease rental. And so the MHS traffic safety plan is estimated at about $3 million. We've got some issues with the MHS clock tower, some masonry, some tuck pointing around there that needs to be replaced. There's also some interior damage within the high school that we would like to fix as soon as that's been remedied. We've set aside some money for the Mishawaka High School auditorium to bring that audio equipment up to present day quality, to get some projection equipment in there and to take a look at the stage lighting. We've got about $90,000 set aside for Ward Baker Park. We've got 3 scoreboards that are beyond their useful life. The soccer scoreboard is barely working currently. Audio and sound equipment at the, I believe it's the JV baseball and softball fields. And then the JV baseball field is in need of some serious infield maintenance. If you've been out there, it's got some pretty heavy lips. It's kind of a safety issue to play on that field. So we've got some money set aside to rework that infield so we don't have those concerns and we can be proud of our JV baseball field. Some of the other projects that are part of this $5 million bond, the John Young Middle School running track is in need of resurfacing. If we allow that to go too many more years, we won't just be resurfacing, we'll be replacing the entire track, similar to what we had to do at the high school, and we don't want to get to that point. We've got some money. The skylights at Mishawaka High School are in need of replacement. They are leaking, and when it rains, we're unfortunately having to shut some of those stairwells down. The server room here at Emmons, or in the technology area, is in need of a new air conditioning HVAC type unit. We've been putting a Band-Aid on it and trying to manually keep it going, but that failed earlier this year and it needs replaced. All of our parking lots are in need of repair and sealant, chip and seal, etc. We've got some playground equipment that Liberty Mutual has wanted us to replace for a number of years now. We've got some old metal slides that get hot, And so we've been holding them off, but they are in
Builds
need.
character.
They are in need of a replacement. I mean, Mike's got a funny name for those, I can't think.
or something.
Well, that's, we've been holding them off, but we do. We have, I believe, 3 metal slides at, I forget the schools, but that need replaced. And Liberty Mutual is going to be very happy to hear we'll be replacing them, as should the students. We also have PA systems in 5 of our schools that are on the verge of failure. And so again, that's another big project. And again, all the projects really revolve around facility needs, whether that be HVAC, plumbing, masonry, electrical, the roofs, the parking lots. Again, it's needed. These will be needed repair items, and of course, they will all be brought to the board for approval before we move forward. So, with that, I'd like to turn it over to Pooja with Baker Tilly, formerly of Umbaugh, and she's going to walk us through the proposed financing.
Thank you, Alex. Good evening, everyone. My name is Pooja Shrestha, and I'm with Baker Tilly. And as Alex mentioned, tonight I'm here to talk through the financing piece of the 5.17 million bonds. So in this presentation, we have information about the school corporation's existing debt and how the 5.17 million bonds will fit in with the school corporation's existing debt structure, and also information on the tax impact. So let's start by looking at the school corporation's existing debt structure. This slide here, slide 2, has, it basically reflects the total annual payments on all of the school corporation's outstanding debt. The school currently has 5 bonds outstanding and a few common school loans, and total annual payments, each bars on this graph represent the total annual payments on those outstanding bonds and common school loans. So if we look at year 2019, the school is currently paying about $6.97 million in total annual debt. But beginning in year 2020 through 2023, the total annual debt steps down to about $5.5 million, and then there's further step down going forward, and all of the school corporation's outstanding bonds and common school loans are paid off by year 2041. So as we move along the presentation, we'll see how the 5.17 million bonds will fit in with this existing debt structure. Slide 3 is the same information we just looked at, just in numerical form, so we can skip through this and go to slide 4. Slide 4 is where we're showing how the 5.17 million bonds will fit in with the school's existing debt. So the green bars on this chart represent the total annual payments on the school corporations, all of the school corporations' currently outstanding bonds. And then we're adding on the blue bars beginning in year 2020 that represent payments on the school corporation's 5.17 million proposed bonds. And as you can see in the chart, we're currently structuring the 5.17 million bonds to be repaid over 9 years. So with that 9-year repayment structure, we're looking at a total interest expense of about $420,000. And in terms of the tax rates, the way we're structuring the 5.17 million bonds, there will be no incremental impact, meaning that the school corporation's debt service tax rate will not increase over the current debt service tax rates in year 19. But if we just look at the 5.17 million bonds specifically, without considering the overall debt structure, and without considering that step down in year 2020, we're looking at a tax impact of about 10 cents. And then the next slide again.
That's 10 cents per $100 of assessed valuation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Next slide here is again the same information in numerical form, so we can go to slide 6. On slide 6, we're just calculating out what that 10-cent impact would mean to the different taxpayers. I will not read through all of the numbers, but if we're just looking at an average homeowner within the school district, that would mean $23.45 of annual impact. And then for a $150,000 home, that would mean $62.31. And then for 1 acre of farmland, that would mean $1.49, and then $100,000 commercial property, that would mean $95.50 impact. So that is all the information I had regarding the 5.17 million bonds. Are there any questions?
I just wanted to point out that your tax incremental impact is looking at if we did nothing today versus doing it, not looking at their 19 bill versus what their 2020 bill will be, correct?
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Would you still project that, based upon that impact, that most taxpayers would still see a decrease in taxes, somewhat decrease in taxes next year?
That is a difficult question to answer, just because there are a lot of factors goes into when a tax bill is calculated, especially because in St. Joe County with the exemption. It depends on whether a taxpayer is at their tax caps or not. So it's difficult to answer or make a statement generally. However, if you just look at your debt service tax rate, we're not increasing that tax rate.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that takes us to item 9.05, approval of resolutions taking action regarding the proposed Fourth Amendment to lease, approving the issuance of bonds by the School City of Mishawaka Multi-School Building Corporation and matters related thereto. Mr. Newman.
Thank you, President Curry. So again, the administration this evening is seeking board approval of a resolution that takes various actions in preparation for the issuance of first mortgage bonds. The resolution for approval this evening, it approves the scope of the projects to be completed, it makes a determination of need, approves the form of lease and related matters, including the approval and issuance of first mortgage bonds by the School City of Mishawaka Multi-Building Corp. It calls a public hearing on the lease amendment, calls a 1028 public hearing on the project, and it calls for an additional appropriation hearing, which will all be combined. So if approved, the combined 1028 lease amendment and additional appropriation public hearing would be held on October 16th, 2019, which is a special board meeting that we've scheduled. So again, we are asking for the approval of this resolution as presented, which would be the next step if we wish to sell these bonds. Our bond, Randy Rumpole, Barnes & Thornburg is here if there are any questions that the board may have.
I'd like to move for approval.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for approval of the recommendation. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Item 9.06, recommendation to approve agreement for municipal advisory services in connection with the sale of 2019 first mortgage bonds. Mr. Newman.
Thank you, President Curry. As we are now moving forward with the sale of 2019 first mortgage bonds, approval of a municipal advisor is necessary. Baker Tilly Municipal Advisors, formerly Umbaugh and Associates, served as municipal advisors for the sale of first mortgage bonds in 2018, in addition to previous issuances as well. And so we requested a proposal for this sale in 2019. The proposal for your approval this evening includes a not-to-exceed fee of $31,000 for preliminary planning and financial development, the marketing and sale of the bonds, in consultation of the protected taxes waiver in 2020. That's a little bit different from the bond sale, but it's absolutely vital for us. An additional not-to-exceed fee of $4,000 is included for services related to the lease efficiency report, and similar to previous engagements, arbitrage and continuing disclosure services will be billed at the hourly rates as defined in Exhibit B of the proposal.
Move for approval.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve the recommendation. Any discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Item 9.07, recommendation to approve terms of engagement for bond counsel in connection with the sale of 2019 first mortgage bonds. Mr. Newman.
Thank you, President Curry. Again, as we move forward with this sale, approval of a legal firm to serve as School City's bond counsel is necessary. Barnes and Thornburg served as bond counsel for the sale of first mortgage bonds in 2018, and again, many issuances prior to that. And so the administration requested a proposal for these services for the sale in 2019. The attached proposal for your approval this evening includes a fee range of $35,000 to $40,000.
Move for approval.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to approve. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Motion carried. Opposed? Motion carried. Item 9.08, recommendation to approve First Amendment to self-funded employer group risk agreement. Mr. Newman.
For your approval this evening is an amendment to the self-funded employer group risk agreement with Select Health System. The agreement is retroactive to November of 2018, and it accomplishes 5 main goals. It stipulates that RX rebates are to be shared 50-50 as it pertains to the calculation of the risk share. It limits School City of Mishawaka's risk share payout in year 2 to $265,900. It calls for an actuarial analysis to determine the risk share target for year 3. It outlines a 3-year net payment of any risk share amounts owed, which is to be paid after year 3. And it modifies the language on the terms. Year 2 is now a 14-month year, and that was at our request because we wanted to get on a calendar year cycle. And then the end date for year 3 is now December's month end as opposed to October. These were all changes that we had requested. Troy Scott with R&R Benefits is here this evening. Should the board have any questions, we are asking that this amendment be approved as presented.
Move for approval of amendment.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the recommendation. Any discussion on the motion?
I am abstaining from voting tonight. I am Select Health's independent auditor, and due to my relationship, I'm not going to vote tonight.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. 1 abstention. We'll note in the minutes that Ms. Roberts abstains.
Bill has something to say.
No, I just think this is a big deal. And you see Alex shaking his head. I think it would be nice to hear from Mr. Scott, maybe to go through it. I mean, this is a big deal. If we could negotiate, maybe you could go through this, Troy, but.
Are there any specific questions or how this started out? The ACO, it's when we entered into this, it was an innovative approach. It was an approach that aligned strategic partnerships. It put the skin in the game of all parties involved. And, like anything else, as the program moved along, there were some changes, some tweaks, some issues that weren't foreseen originally. And so what this amendment does is it addresses a majority of those issues. And to give you an example, the first one, the RX rebates. Prior to going with this program, the rebates did not flow back to School City of Mishawaka. And basically what RX rebates are rebates from the drug manufacturer that go towards the purchase of certain brand name drugs. Those rebates were not flowing back to the school. We negotiated that 100% of the rebates should come back to the school, and they have come back. I think the first year, that number was a fairly large number, about $350,000. So this program brought that in. What we didn't consider was that it's actual in equity, in equitable terms. In the risk share agreement, it's actual cost that you got refunded. So when we're looking at the total cost in the risk share, should we have pulled those out or should we treat those differently? We came to negotiated a 50-50 split to kind of fair and true up that analysis. The second one, and we're making the change for the actuarial analysis for year 3, the way we were setting the benchmark at the time, we were taking the underwritten analysis of 6 or 7 stop loss companies, which was an actuarial study. We were throwing out the high, throwing out the low. and looking at the average. And, you know, in all intents and purposes, that worked. But what we found was we didn't always have control over what was going into these, the analysis. And when I say we, School City of Mishawaka and our partners in this risk share agreement, Select Health. And so we decided that for year 3, we're going to use an actuary. And so again, you know, that was an equitable decision on both parties. But we had to address year 2. And, you know, through negotiation, we said, you know what, we couldn't control everything that went in there. And although you feel very confident of that number, we negotiated a cap for year 2, really limiting the liability of School City of Mishawaka, again, in an attempt to be a good partner, but also to be fair in the analysis. So that is why the risk share payout is capped in year 2. I already talked about the actuary analysis that we are using for year 3. We are both going to have input to what this actuary will receive. We've had numerous meetings and phone calls, so both Select and School City for that agreement will know exactly what they are reviewing. And so when they set the risk share number, will be in agreement from the beginning. And then the net payment for the outliers, it was set up before that, you know, we go at the end of the first year, do our calculations, what, you know, where the actual spend came into play, we would make the payment at that time. We changed that by saying, let's do this over 3 years. So we'll take year 1, we'll figure that number out, which we have. Year 2, we'll do our calculation there. Year 3, we'll do our calculation, we'll net out a payment, and a check will be cut going each way and where it falls in the risk share. So again, from a cash flow perspective, from a partnership perspective, we're all aligned, and we are just strengthening this relationship with this amendment.
Any questions? All right, John. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Item 9.09, recommendation to approve resolution number 2019-009 regarding teachers' retirement savings. Mr. Newman.
Thank you, President Curry. As part of House Enrolled Act 1001, the state appropriated $150 million from the state's general fund to the 1996 Teacher Retirement Fund. Those monies were deposited in that fund to allow for a reduction in contributions from employers, school corporations, by 2%. So effective July 1st of 2019, contributions to this fund were reduced. Really kind of have a bit of a, there's really a 3% component to the retirement, but overall, the percentage went from 10.5 down to 8.5%. And as part of this change, the governing body of each school corporation, so the school board, must in a public meeting determine the dollar amount of savings and the action or actions that each governing body intends to take with these savings. We didn't have to do a resolution, but I really just wanted to crack and type one up myself. So we're doing a resolution. Basically what this resolution states this evening is that School City of Mishawaka believes it will save approximately $300,000 per year. When I calculated out, it was like $298,000 some odd dollars. And that our intent, and this was Mr. Barker's decision, and I agree with him, our intent is to utilize these savings toward teacher salaries and the corresponding benefits. The money was saved on teacher costs, and the savings should go back to those teachers. So that's what this resolution for your approval this evening states.
I would move for approval.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the resolution as presented. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. All right, to the leadership and policy section of the agenda now. Item 10.01, 322.0.01 Teacher Appreciation Grant. Ms. Stoltz.
Good evening. This will be, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, the last time that I'm up here doing this for you guys, because we even get to waive the second reading of this policy, so I won't be here for the second one either. So House Enrolled Act 1001 amended Indiana Code 2043-10 3.5 to add the option of allocating up to 20% of the grant received to teachers with less than 5 years of service who are rated as effective or highly effective in the teacher appreciation grants that we receive. Senior leadership has met with the MEA, and they've discussed the options, and the MEA agreed with senior leadership not to elect this option. So basically, the policy is going to stay the same as it is, but we have to put that portion of wording in the policy saying that we are not going to take that option. The policy has to be adopted by the board one way or the other by the 15th of September, which is why they've given us the okay to waive the second reading. So unless there are any questions tonight, there's a recommendation to not only waive the second reading, but adopt the teacher appreciation grant update as presented.
Is there a motion to accept the recommendation and waive the second reading?
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on the motion? If not, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Well, Ms. Sean.
I won't miss being here, believe it or not.
You're going to be watching.
You've been watching
Oh,
for
that's right.
YouTube.
That's right. Yes, yes.
She
I
may
will.
still be required to attend.
Yeah. Thank you.
Do a little 10 questions that you have to fill in for the next day.
All right, and finally, into the communication section. Item 11.01. The next regular meeting of the Board of School Trustees will be held on September 25th, 2019, beginning at 7 o'clock p.m. at Twin Branch Elementary School, 3810 Lincoln Way East here in Mishawaka, Indiana. Is there anything else to come before the board? If not, I will declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Hey.